For those who are quite concerned and see a lot of our governors being issued directives from Klaus Schwab and this World Economic Forum, what do we want to watch out for as the calendar rolls by and more of these shenanigans are coming forth? Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And especially with the latest Davos meeting rolling right around the corner, Klaus Schwab, we can only imagine how excited he is getting. So I'm quite fortunate to have Alex Newman, the senior editor of the New American and also runs the Liberty Sentinel, where he reads through a lot of these things that are planned, which for a long time, I think many in the financial markets may have seen as conspiracy theory, and then lived through the last 2 years of life on planet Earth, and think people are more quickly finding out about Davos World Economic Forum and all these things. So Alex, I appreciate you making some time to join me here. It's not always easy stuff to dig through, so I think we're fortunate to have someone of your intelligence and integrity who's watching out on some of these things. So great to have you. And how's everything going with you today?
Doing great. Thank you so much, Chris. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you. And it's true. For years, we were sounding the alarm about the World Health Organization and the Davos crowd at the World Economic Forum. And we were called conspiracy theorists by all the leading propaganda mouthpieces of the predator class, the New York Slimes, the Washington Compost. And then the last 2 years happened and suddenly, oh, wow, yeah, you're right. No, actually, we did the first report on the Great Reset of any American media outlet and got lots of flack from the fake media. They said we were conspiracy theorizing and all the rest of it. I said, nope, just quoting exactly what they said at their World Economic Forum meeting. And of course, here we are now. Everybody who's not living under a rock knows that these psychopaths are planning basically global hell on earth with no freedom for you and lots of money and power for them. And hey, the battle goes on, right?
Alex, I feel like you're holding back already, but
well, I don't want to make the fascists at the social media companies mad, so we don't want to trigger them with any of their trigger words.
Oh no, I'm just teasing. I like that you're bringing the fiery passion that I think is I think is warranted. Maybe we need a little bit more of, although again, for folks who might be new to hearing some of these things, first of all, here's the World Economic Forum annual meeting was rescheduled to May 22, May 26. So that will be kicking into action. And to set the context, at least give an example, Alex, you and I talked about this years ago, because back in October 18th of 2019, during a Saturday afternoon in New York, John Hopkins, Bill and Melinda Gates we're hosting a high-level pandemic exercise where public-private partnerships necessary, basically mapping out the response to a severe pandemic to diminish large-scale economic and societal consequences. They said it was only a coincidence that they happened to be studying this, making videos of simulations, what would happen in the economy, and then basically everything that they made videos and wrote about was what we lived through the last 2 years. So I'll leave that up to the viewer at home to decide what to make of that. But for those who are quite concerned and see a lot of our governors being issued directives from Klaus Schwab and this World Economic Forum, what do we want to watch out for as the calendar rolls by and more of these shenanigans are coming forth?
Well, the World Economic Forum definitely bears watching. Klaus Schwab has been in recent months talking about their exercises for a cyber pandemic. And I think we should take those warnings very seriously. They've actually been studying it and doing war games about it. They did an exercise called Cyber Polygon, where maybe hypothetically, kind of like with Event 201, maybe at some point in the future, somebody might do a cyber attack and maybe you won't have internet for a little while. Maybe your lights will turn off and your airplanes won't fly anymore. So I suspect that they're up to something. But there's also those dates that the World Economic Forum will be meeting are very, very important. May 22nd also is the first day of the World Health Assembly's 75th meeting, at which they're set to consider new amendments proposed by the Biden regime to what they call the international health regulations. This is basically the global guidebook for implementing health tyranny. And the Biden administration has proposed these crazy amendments, giving the WHO even more power, removing the requirement that the target nation, that the target government give its consent to what the WHO is planning. So pretty significant what's happening. I don't think it's a coincidence that the WHO is meeting in Switzerland during the very same week that the World Economic Forum is meeting in Switzerland. I'm sure they will be up to no good. And after that, they're planning the International Pandemic Treaty to, again, give even more power to the WHO. So I think these are some of the things that people ought to be watching for. But also, of course, we've got the upcoming food shortages that are pretty much baked into the cake at this point. I mean, they have so destroyed our supply chains. They have so destroyed our agricultural systems. By the way, 100% on purpose. None of this is an accident, right? It's not going to be just inflation that is terrorizing our communities, if we want to put it mildly. I think it's going to get a whole lot worse. And I think the food crisis that they're preparing is something that we really need to be paying attention to. And if you can, you might want to take some prudent precautions.
Yeah, and Alex, I think that'd be a great part to dig into. I left the US. I've been in Mexico for the past year. I didn't know that it was going to get to the point where we'd have warnings about overt food shortages, let alone the president saying, you know, hey, I got it under control, then start watching out for a food supply. You're in the US, so in addition to studying it, you're seeing it every day. Can you help folks know we hear a lot in the news, have we seen the effects of this? What's really happening? What's fact versus fiction there with the food supply issue?
Well, to start off with, we can say very clearly, without any doubt, that food prices are going absolutely through the roof. I've never seen anything like this in America in my life. I grew up in the third world, so I'm used to very radical inflation. I'm used to political unrest and things like that. I'm used to surging crime. But in the US, this is not something that you see every day. And, you know, I think there's this naivete among Americans. Well, you know, food shortages, who cares? We've got the dollar. The dollar is the global reserve currency. We'll just buy the food out from underneath the Africans or the Asians or the Latin Americans or whatever, because, hey, the dollar is king. Well, if the dollar is no longer king, and I suspect those days are coming faster than any of us would like to admit, suddenly you won't be able to use your little fancy schmancy dollars to buy food out from under other people. So I think there is a coordinated effort, Chris, to demolish the food supply. I've been talking to farmers who've been given 10-year contracts by the federal government. The federal government is paying them more money to promise not to grow any food than they would earn from actually growing food. They're calling it land restoration. They got all these silly names for it, but basically they're paying farmers not to grow food. At the same time, they're saying, all right, no more fertilizer from Russia, no more fertilizer from Trinidad and Tobago, no more fertilizer from the Caribbean. The train companies, Union Pacific, is saying we're not going to carry any more fertilizer from CF Holdings, the largest fertilizer producer here in America. So we've got a fertilizer crisis about to hit. We've got rice yields in Asia down quite significantly. We've got corn crops this year being planted way later than they should be. We've got food processing facilities all across the country, dozens of them going up in flames. The 2 airplanes crashed into food processing facilities over the last couple of months. Like, what are the odds of that, right? You've got major meat processing plants going down. And I think what they're doing, in addition to trying to get rid of a lot of people, the globalists have been so clear for decades about their crazy, unhinged belief that there are too many of us and that we would all be better off if there were less of us. I mean, they put this down on paper, right? It's not me saying this or speculating. I mean, I've read the documents that they say there are too many people and we need to reduce the population, and food is one way to do that. But I think another thing that they want to do, Chris, is consolidate control over the food supply. They don't like the idea of a country like America, incredibly prosperous, not only self-sufficient in food, but able to export massive amounts of food around the world, thanks to largely the efforts of small independent producers, right? Farmers and ranchers who own their own family farms that have been passed down from generations. They want to eliminate all that and take total control of the food supply, centralize it in these big companies like Vanguard and BlackRock and State Street, through corporations that they control like Pepsi and Coke and all these major processed food purveyors. So plus you got, of course, Bill Gates now buying up hundreds of thousands of acres, also investing in these disgusting lab-grown meats and then lab-grown franken foods that they're doing, and the biological engineering, crossing poisonous bacteria with crops. Frankly, I think these people are insane, Chris. I wouldn't trust them to sweep the floor on my porch, much less to control my food supply, but that's what they're going for.
Yeah, it certainly is unfortunate, although perhaps most importantly, what could you say to folks in terms of ways to respond? Are there solutions that you've come across, or someone who's feeling a little overwhelmed about that? What can they actually do?
I think starting with the basics makes sense, right? Next time you go to the grocery store, instead of buying what you need, buy twice what you need. Buy some extra rice, buy some extra beans, buy some extra canned SpaghettiOs, whatever you're thinking, maybe not SpaghettiOs, right? Here I am criticizing processed food, but get yourself some extra food as you go, non-perishable foods. There are companies that sell long-term storable food. If you don't have any, you might consider getting some. And also, I think you want to come up with ways to be able to produce your own food if necessary. If you have a little bit of spare cash laying around and you're worried about the Federal Reserve smoking it up through inflation, maybe buy yourself some agricultural land, right? Agricultural land, they're not making any more of it. I put my money where my mouth is. I've been buying a little bit here and there as I've been able, or at least stock indexes that own large tracts of agricultural land. So you want to prepare yourself in that sense. And then, hey, if you can have your wife grow a little bit of a vegetable garden in the backyard, if you can get some backyard chickens, hey, more power to you. You don't want to be caught off guard when this stuff hits the fan. And like you said, we've got the president of the United States telling you that food shortages are looming. You've got Tucker Carlson, the top cable news host in America, telling you that food shortages are looming. The lemmings haven't quite caught on yet, but once they catch on, it's not going to be pretty. And so you don't want to be caught on the wrong side of that.
Yeah, and especially I know there's a lot of people listening. If someone lives in Manhattan or in a city where maybe you don't have a backyard or a place to garden yet, there's usually somewhere not too far from your neighborhood where you can get involved with other people who are doing something. I have a friend that I knew in New York 10 years ago. She recently moved out of the Bronx and now is in a farm upstate New York, and just getting involved in those type of projects, is that a reasonable solution for the person who's saying, well, it makes sense, but I don't have a direct place, but there are other people out there that you can network with, and now could be a good time to start doing that?
Absolutely, Chris. No question about it. In fact, my wife and I, we've been buying our produce from a local farmer. They sell us eggs. They sell us fresh produce every week. They sell us milk, which is delicious. They sell us honey. And so develop those relationships now with the independent farmers, because, when the grocery store shelves are empty, like we saw with toilet paper during the COVID pandemic, but, it will be worse than toilet paper this time. You want to be able to go to that farmer and say, look, I've been buying from you for a year. You know me, I'm even willing to pay you a premium, but hey, let's make a deal. So having those relationships in place before things get ugly will be to your advantage. Go to the farmer's market, talk to some of the farmers, tell them you want their seconds, right? There are lots of good ways to start developing those relationships. You can join co-ops. You can buy yourself, half a cow from a local rancher, and that cow will be reserved for you. So when times get tough, you'll have plenty of access to beef. So lots of different things that people can do, and I encourage people to think in those terms. I don't like people to panic. Panic is conducive to making stupid decisions and making big mistakes. So don't panic, but recognize that look through your normalcy bias and realize that things may not be going as smoothly 6 months from now as they're going right now. And you want to take, Machiavelli, 500 years ago, talked about the most common defect in man is that during the calm, he never prepares for the storm, right? We're in the calm right now. It would be very prudent of you to realize that there are storm clouds building on the horizon, and you don't want to get walloped if and when that hits.
Yeah, I think that is certainly wise advice. And Alex, certainly a lot of these things have been exacerbated since the breakout of conflict in Ukraine with Russia and then sanctioning Russia. It seems to me that the sanctions are blowing back on the American people, which I'll leave my thoughts aside. Anything you'd like to share about what you've seen in this conflict, which doesn't seem to be going well by any means? And now it's, I see Sweden, Finland, they're joining NATO. It sounds a lot like World War III, the way it's shaping up. I don't want to say that callously, but any thoughts on what we're seeing there?
Yeah, I think World War III is a real possibility, Chris. I actually predicted before it happened that the Russians would invade and that the globalists would milk this conflict for everything that it's worth. And of course, every word that I said has now come true. I'm not one of those who likes to say I told you so, but I actually told you so. quite a bit in advance. And, the globalists have been masters of using war to advance their objectives for a long time. They've actually put this down on paper. Back in the 1960s, Lincoln Bloomfield, a member of the globalist deep state swamp known as the Council on Foreign Relations, he did a report called "The World Effectively Controlled by the United Nations" for the U.S. State Department. And his task was to figure out how do we get from where we are, a world of independent sovereign nation states, to where we want to be, a one world government controlled by the United Nations. And he concluded that crises, war, and the threat of war were the fastest way to get people to surrender their attachment to national sovereignty and self-government. So I think that's what we're seeing. Putin, I mean, he should get an award for best NATO salesman of the year, right? Nobody has done more for NATO and the European Union, or the new European Soviet, as Mikhail Gorbachev called it, than Vladimir Putin. Period. End of story. There's no other salesman as good for NATO as Putin has been. And so, clearly it's going to exacerbate the food shortages, especially for the Europeans. Ukraine is really the breadbasket of Europe when it comes to wheat. And of course, they're not planting a whole lot this year for obvious reasons. So what they're doing here, I think by the time all is said and done, you pointed out quite correctly that the sanctions are coming back to bite us. I think by the time this is all said and done, it's going to look like on the surface, Chris, that the U.S. government scored the most spectacular own goal in all of human history. We put sanctions on Russia to punish Putin. And by the time this is all over, it's going to absolutely decimate the United States economy. It's going to decimate the U.S. dollar. And it's going to result in a fundamental restructuring of the world order. And of course, this is something that the globalists have been planning for a long time. Putin and Henry Kissinger are like two peas in a pod. And the evidence of this is all over. They brag about it in public. Kissinger first proposed this idea in his book World Order, that the contemporary quest for world order involves merging the world into regional orders like the European Union, like the Eurasian Union that Putin is building in the process and on the way to creating a one world order. And so that's what we're seeing right now. And I think Putin is playing his part very well. He's the boogeyman at the moment, but he is following the script. He's building the Eurasian Union just like he should. And, the globalists have for over a decade been talking about the desirability or alleged desirability of shifting away from what they describe as a unipolar world order, basically the world order that has existed really since the end of World War II, with an unchallengeable hegemonic power in the U.S. government in terms of military and economic dominance, in a way that really all the nations in the world combined couldn't have touched us. They want to shift that away from this unipolar model to what they describe as the multipolar model, where most recently the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, calls it a concert of nations would shepherd the world order. So we'd have China and Russia, maybe Brazil, South Africa, Germany, the UK, France, and the United States together shepherding in this one world system. And I think that's what's going to be the end result of all this. There may well be an outbreak of very significant war, potentially even catastrophic war with many, many people dead. And I don't say that lightly. But from the ashes of all, just like after World War I, what did we see? We saw the attempted imposing of the League of Nations on humanity. Fortunately, our Senate said no, so that died on the vine. But then they came back after World War II, and they built the infrastructure necessary for global government. We got the United Abominations, better known as the United Nations. We got the World Bank. We got the International Monetary Fund. We got all this infrastructure that could and eventually will be used to promote a one world government. So I think at the end of whatever comes out of Russia, Ukraine, which I think is very real possibility this will result in a bigger conflagration. They hope to establish really what they've been calling for decades now, the New World Order. So that's what we need to be alert for. I think we need to do everything in our power to prevent it, but recognize, step one of preventing it is understanding what their plan is.
Yeah, and Alex, in there you mentioned something I've been waiting to ask you about for a couple weeks already. With Putin, and you phrased it as playing his role. Here I see that Putin was giving an address at Davos. You have Clausy introducing him here, then Putin talking. It's hard for me to know what's real, who's on what side, who's doing what, but at least to the degree that we see Putin addressing them, based on what you've seen, is this he's part of the agenda, or is he breaking away and that's what is going on with the conflict? What do you see as the truth in that one?
Well, I've written on this very extensively, Chris. In fact, back in 2014, when the U.S. State Department helped overthrow the Ukrainian government, people like Victoria Nuland and so on in that color revolution, I wrote 2 very in-depth articles, ended up being part of a cover story package for the New American Magazine on Putin. I encourage people to go back and read those because they're more relevant today than they were back in 2014 when I wrote them. One was called Putin, a key player in the New World Order. The other was called merging Putin's East with the globalist West. And it was about this process of convergence that the globalists have talked about for so long. So I believe Putin is playing his role here. I believe he's a part of this agenda to create a one world system. And I think the evidence of that is overwhelming. Now, it is possible. These people are worse than the worst gangsters you can imagine. They're worse than the worst mafia bosses you can imagine. At least the mafia bosses had some basic standards, right? We don't murder each other's wives and children, basic ethical standards like that. These monsters have no such scruples. And they turn on each other all the time. I always remind people, just go back to the Soviet Union. Out of Stalin's 34 top deputies, I think 3, maybe 4 died a natural death. One of them, Leon Trotsky, of course, ended up with an ice pick in his head in Mexico City. And so that's what these people do to each other, right? They're ruthless, they're animals, they're savages. And so they don't see anything wrong with stabbing each other in the back and murdering lots of people. So is it possible that Putin left the reservation and is now trying to do his own thing? Sure. That's possible. But the much more likely scenario is that Putin is playing his designated role as boogeyman du jour, helping to encourage the Europeans to quickly give up even more sovereignty, build a European Union military, strengthen and deepen NATO, get all those countries that have tried to maintain at least a little bit of their sovereignty on board, Finland, Sweden, Switzerland, et cetera. And so I think Putin has done a stellar job at helping to advance this agenda. And I think this will become more clear as time goes on, Chris.
Yeah, I've been wondering about that. And sure enough, even I was noticing as we had this pulled up, there's Xi Jinping, and you see the World Economic Forum backdrop in there on their channel again. So,
yeah, Winnie the Pooh. He was the keynote speaker in 2017, and all the globalists were fun. Oh, what a great global leader. Oh, Trump is messing up the New World Order, but Xi Jinping, Winnie the Pooh, is going to save us. I mean, that's how these clowns roll. Klaus Schwab and Winnie the Pooh, Xi Jinping, are like 2 peas in a pod. And Bill Gates and Winnie the Pooh. I mean, these guys are all part of the club. And as George Carlin used to say, you're not in it, suckers. So, we need to recognize that we're being deceived on a massive scale. It's true with Putin. It's true with this weirdo running the Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And it's true with Winnie the Pooh. And it's true with Joe Biden. So.
Well, we won't even get started on Joe today. He deserves his own separate library, perhaps. Although the last one for you today, Alex, another thing that you've written about for, I think, over a decade is gold and silver manipulation. You and I have talked about that quite a bit before. And curious, A, any thoughts on the gold and silver markets? And B, perhaps, do you have any insight as to what these Davos guys, what they're looking towards? Are they planning a reset? Are they looking at that US debt clock and saying we got to wipe this out somehow? We hear about central bank digital currencies. In terms of the metals and an economic currency system going forward, what are you expecting there?
Well, I'll tell you, I am amazed at their ability to manipulate the gold and silver markets with this degree of effectiveness. It truly is incredible. You got prices for everything going through the roof. You've got everybody knows inflation is going through the roof, and somehow gold and silver prices are going down. I mean, that is some serious market manipulation, and their ability to keep the lid on this is incredible. Again, I encourage people to go back and read my article on this, Fed manipulations in the crosshair. I exposed all of this well over a decade ago. They are continuing to do this. I didn't think they'd be able to keep a handle on it this effectively for this long, but I can't imagine it'll continue forever. They are planning what they call a great reset, and in their mind, they're going to get rid of most private property ownership. They want to move us to a one world currency in the form of special drawing rights run by the IMF. This is not my opinion. This is not me speculating. This is not even me connecting the dots. This is me just reading their reports and telling you what they say. The same people that were running the Obama administration, like Timothy TurboTax Geithner, who said the Communist Chinese Central Bank's proposal was a really good idea to move away from the dollar as a global reserve and toward a one world currency. These are the same people running the Biden administration, literally the same people, right? The same handlers behind the scenes. So they are planning big things on the economic front. And they keep talking about this build back better, right? The first phase of the build back better is destroy what exists already. So I think we're right now in the controlled demolition phase where they are destroying what's left of the U.S. economy, destroying what's left of the U.S. dollar. And then they fully intend to build back better. And of course, better from their perspective, right? With more slavery, more control over the people, less sovereignty, less freedom for individuals. That's their plan. And it's going to involve tremendous changes in monetary really in the monetary system of the world and also in the economy of the world. They want to totally reshape the economy at the business level too, right? They're moving away from traditional capitalism where companies are supposed to be pursuing the best interest of shareholders, making profits by serving and satisfying the needs of their customers, to this new model. They call it stakeholder capitalism that Klaus Schwab has been a big advocate of, where instead of serving the consumer and the shareholder, businesses exist to basically follow the dictates of the elitists, the predator class. You got to do your environmental and your social and your governance, your ESG, right? Who cares what those dumb consumers want? Who cares what those silly shareholders want? We got to be woke. We got to promote the agenda. Right. And so that's the model that they're moving toward. It is basically global neo-feudalism, if you will. Whether they'll succeed or not is a whole nother question. I don't ascribe as much power as some people do to these people. These people are not gods. They're maniacs. And I don't know that they'll succeed, but I know what they want. And they've been pretty clear about what they want. So now I see it as our not just right, but our duty to resist this and to do our best to expose them and to stop them.
Well, which starts with being aware of some of these hard to imagine schemes that are out there. And that's why I'm grateful that you're digging into this. It is not easy stuff to go through. But Alex, can you let folks know how they can stay up to date with the things you're writing, and also perhaps mention that you're running for office? So nice to have someone who's not in that club actually getting out there and trying to do something about it. So how can folks stay up to date on that?
Hey, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to come on, as always, Chris. My personal website is libertysentinel.org. I'm also a senior editor at the New American Magazine. You can find us at thenewamerican.com. And then my campaign, I'm running for State House here in the state of Florida in District 28. You can find me at Alex Newman 4, the number 4, Florida.com. And hey, if you're in Florida, you want to get involved in the campaign, we got plenty of room for door knockers, sign waivers, phone callers. And if you're outside of Florida and want to support the campaign, there's options there as well. So thank you again, Chris, for having me on. Thanks for all that you're doing. Hopefully we'll see each other soon, either in Mexico or the United States or some third country. But I appreciate all that you're doing. Thank you for continuing to sound the alarm about what's happening in the precious metals markets and, just being a stalwart of truth and freedom. So thank you, Chris. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Alex. We'll get all those links you mentioned in the description field below, so you can check those out after we're done. And thanks for what you're doing, and we'll have to check in with you again soon.
Thanks so much, Chris.
Well, thank you again, Alex. Sure appreciate that report. A lot of interesting information that Alex digs into. Not the easiest subject to peruse through, although certainly I think we've been learning how much impact they have on our lives, especially anyone up in Canada, seeing what Justin Trudeau was doing earlier this year, and especially with a lot of his marching orders seemingly coming from the Davos cabal. So appreciate that, Alex. Appreciate everybody at home watching. Hope you're having a great day so far and doing well out there. And before we wrap up, one last final thank you to Goldsilver, who kindly sponsored tonight's episode and brought us this show, giving us the information from Alex, bringing us a little closer to freedom, as silver often does. And Goldsilver, one of the companies that we're going to be counting on to continue finding silver deposits out there. Not the easiest thing to do, although I guess it helps when you have the great Dr. Peter McGaugh, one of the top geologists, especially well known in the silver community. If you're looking for silver in Mexico, Dr. Peter McGaugh is one of the people you call. And fortunately, Jorge Ramiro Monroy did call him, his partner. And to find out a little bit more about what they're doing in some of their projects, well, just click on this video that's coming your way now.